Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to SARs October meeting. Well, tonight it gives me great pleasure to welcome and have in person Christine Broadbent, as well as giving us a Zoom talk. While Australian, her official home is New Zealand, though she comes back to Sydney for a few months twice a year.
Half the time.
Christine feels immensely grateful to have found astrology as a vocation, has shifted from an academic career for nearly 40 years ago. Since astrology interfaces the mysteries of birth patterns and planetary cycles, she finds it endlessly fascinating. Her three passions are astrology readings, teaching, and writing. Christine has published journals and writes the stargazing columns for Australian and New Zealand magazines and has presented at conferences. In recent years, soul path awareness has been a theme in her work, which influences her mentor programming, workshops, and retreats. So to fill you in more, and I will hand it over to say, welcome, Christine.
Thank you. Yes, please. Well, hi, everyone. We're going to get through to the PowerPoint and we'll talk to that. We'll go on to the actual slideshow. No. That's it far in. That's not the beginning. We have to get the beginning. Good. Now, we've got a Christine on the screen here, but I don't think it's me. Is that someone wanting to be?
No, it's okay. You'll see it. So you can just start. Just ignore that.
Okay. So I'm not visible at all. Normally there's a little... Whatever, maybe you're seeing my name, maybe you're seeing me. Hello. Now I'm trying to somehow walk the walk of this being a live presentation, which I consider is first and foremost, and also taking care of Zoom people. But if they're in fact not even seeing me, which seems to be the case, then...
You can start the presentation.
Yeah, then it means that as long as they're seeing my PowerPoint, all is good. Excellent. Because I do prefer to walk around and move my hands. Gemini rise in Aries, it can't keep me still. Right. So mysteries and traditions. It's fascinating. I'm not a long-term traditional astrologer in that I still favour the Placidus system. Good friends of mine who have gone completely to traditional astrology, of course, nothing but whole sign and so on. But it's always good to look at the whole sign chart, I believe, particularly for people born in far southern and northern latitudes. However, it's just some of the basic, really juicy things of traditional astrology that I'm particularly interested in, and I think lead us directly into the mystery in our midst. One of the things that has influenced me when it comes to mystery and the sort of inner workings of things is that I was very fortunate to get to spend a year in a Sufi school up in North Queensland, long time ago, 1988, when many of you weren't born, perhaps, that are listening to this. And it was an extraordinary experience because one of the things I learned is that there is a branch of Islamic mysticism, which comes under the Sufi rubric, which actually looks at all the planets and looks at them with such an interesting new slant. And so Venus, for instance, is the creative imagination, the alam mithal, the world of the imagination is opened through Venus. Now that, to me, just gave another level to my understanding of Venus. And I'm just mentioning that it's not the reason for my talk, but it somehow informs so many things, that realization that there is always an inner to the outer. There is always a mystery to the normal. And the big thing is that mystery tends to be in the ordinary, not the special. That's all the sleight of hand stuff, sleight of hand. But in the ordinary, the mystery is in our midst. It's just out of sight, that's all. And astrology is a tool for bringing it into sight. So we begin. And yes, it's a bit later now. How much later is it? What, 7:15? Maybe 10 past. But anyway, this chart's still pretty good. I set this chart for our 7 p.m. start, and we've been all talking our heads off, I might add, since 7 p.m. And it's an interesting chart, as you can see. we've got a very similar chart here. Now, hopefully, we have a problem. My cursor's not working. Oh, there it is. There it is. You will see we've got a grand trine. So tonight, and that grand trine, naturally, since it's between Venus, Mars, and Saturn, all in water signs, a water grand trine, it's going to be a part of tomorrow's new moon, which is lovely. There's interesting thing tonight. If you look here at the moon, which won't have moved far, the moon takes about 2.5 hours, doesn't it, to move 1 degree. So if you look at the moon, you'll see how close it is tonight to the south node. Now, I think of the south node as the old soul business point of the eclipse axis. And the fact that we are just on this pre-10 hours, we're only about 8 hours, I think, or 10 hours or whatever it is away. Anyway, it's 5:49 tomorrow morning, Sydney time, New South Wales time, AEST, which is many, many states. And that includes Queensland until we move to daylight saving. It's 5:49 a.m. that will be the exact annular solar eclipse. So it's not one of those amazing eclipses where if you're in the right place, you can actually take your protective glasses off and see the sun black. But it is an annular eclipse. It is a part of the fact that we are now at the tail end of the Aries Libra eclipse cycle. It's been going each eclipse cycle. It's very neat. They happen every 18.5 years. The nodes are back where they were when you were born. And for about 18 months, they're in a particular set of signs. So we're already starting that shift to Pisces Virgo. Remember the Pisces full moon? Just last month, that was an eclipse, except it was the wrong time of day for us. We couldn't see it. It's got to happen at night. Lunar eclipses are terrific. It's only got to be nighttime and you can see it. Solar eclipses, you've got to be in the right 100-mile stretch somewhere in the world, you know. I've been to two totals, Seduna and Cairns. So eclipses are special. Being in a cardinal sign, I think, adds extra strength to the eclipse cycle. And so here we are tonight with the moon right next to the south node. So we're engaged in old soul business already, and perhaps more strongly tonight even than tomorrow since the moon is so close. But of course, the north node is theoretically the pull towards our potential, but it's not an either or. It's a circle. If you see the diagrams there, it's a dragon swallowing its tail. It's a circle. So by going towards our potential, in this case, the Aries North node, we're there better able to come back to know our old soul business. And then by claiming more of our old soul business, we're better able to move forward to the next little tiny accretion of potential, because nothing is big, it's small. Small accretion is good. Big, it's usually a myth. So it's an interesting time, and old soul business is a funny thing, because I was just saying how I've just got to spend the last month of September in Southwest Rocks, and I hadn't been there since I was a child, and it was extraordinary. And this North Node is basically, yes, 6 degrees, my sun degree. So I got to go to my old childhood dream place where I had the happiest times of my childhood. And here we have beautiful Venus. I particularly like this one. It's a votive offering Venus. It's old. It's Venus with her seashells. And you're obviously meant to put your offering in that little thing she's holding. So we start with Venus because she's the ruler. And this is one of the things about traditional astrology that I believe should be carved in what, wood, iron, you name it. Don't throw away the traditional rulers because of the fact that Uranus has come along to be a secondary ruler of Aquarius, or Pluto's come along to be a secondary ruler of Scorpio. Stick with the traditional ones, use the secondary ones as well. But if you really watch it, you'll see the traditional ones tend to be the stronger. So Mars rules our meeting. If you notice the chart, it was Aries rising. Some of you will have noticed that. So good old Mars. Now, Mars is coming into much more focus, as you'll see when we get to the shifts that are starting just next year. less than a year away. We're in big shift time, and those shifts take all to at least the middle of 2026 to fully shift, because it's the 3 slow planets. So Mars is going to become a ruler of one of those. But at the moment, Mars is making trouble for people like me who are Aries by being in Cancer. And it means something when you say that a planet is in its fall. You see, Mars is exalted. This is another traditional rule that is important. Mars is exalted in Capricorn. Why? Because Mars can do such good practical stuff in Capricorn. It harnesses all that wild energy and gives it outcomes that are relatively contained by that earthy, controlling Capricorn energy. Mars and Saturn are both considered malefics. They kind of help each other out, those guys. But think about the other thing. Venus is also in her debility. We've got this grand trine that is happening now, but Venus is in Scorpio. She rules Taurus. So she's in her debility. Now, that's a word, there's been a sort of modernizing and saying, well, we don't want to say it's bad. Let's sort of say it's, you know, and yes, it's important to realize the good things of everything. And there's certainly nothing wrong with Venus in Scorpio. So for instance, a lot of Libran sun sign people are born with Venus in Scorpio. And it's a lovely combination, because instead of being all air, they've got the depth and intensity and emotional resonance of the Scorpio ruling the air. It's not that the debility means that it's bad to have it. It means it's harder for it to do its natural work. Venus in Scorpio can't be like a pig in mud and love cooking and love gardening and laying back and enjoying life like it can in Taurus. I know, I'm Venus in Taurus. But it goes deep. It opens doors it's not meant to open. And yes, it might mean you're not getting the nice, happy, easy Venus stuff going on. But it's Venus in Scorpio. And that's what we've got at the moment. So the only one in that triangle that we've got right now in tomorrow's new moon that isn't in a fall or a detriment is Saturn. And it's not in a strong place, but it's in Jupiter's sign. So there's a bit of a contrast there, but we won't go into that now. But Saturn's in the sign, which is the exaltation of Venus. And exaltations, I think, are another thing that are a most wonderful part of traditional astrology. It's not just what's ruled, it's where the planet is exalted, because the word exalted immediately, it suggests this is somehow an elevation of the energy. And yes, you can see that with the exaltation of Mars in Capricorn. Venus is exalted in Pisces. And again, it makes perfect sense that, particularly when you know the mythic origins of Venus, but quite apart from the mythic origins of Venus, which we'll touch on later, it makes perfect sense that the great ocean and the oceanic unconscious and the flow of feelings would be where the goddess of love and beauty gets to be exalted. So that was a round and round chart, because there was no final ruler of it. And that's why I say at the end, and yet it looks like, you know, Mars is ruling the chart because it's Aries rising, you know, for our meeting, that's all, just our meeting. But Mars rules Scorpio and the moon rules Mars. So it goes round and round, back to the moon. So this is the lunar climax, just so we get the fullness of the cycle. We start tomorrow at 5:49 with the new moon. It gets a lot heavier. We don't get a Mars trine anymore. We start the new moon with a lovely little soft, you know, Mars trine, Venus trine, Saturn. But look what Mars is up to at the full moon. It's hooked into a T-square to the sun and the moon. Not so easy. It has an edge of sort of a bit of violence and upset, and, you know, not an easy full moon. A full moon to not choose to go abseiling or skydiving. Or to even have an argument with your loved ones. Not a good idea, because Mars in Cancer, you know, means that your touchy place where you can be most Mars-like and explosive is home and family. That's where you're most protective, because Mars in Cancer is deeply protective. But Mars can, in a hair's breadth, go from protection to warrior, protection to attack. So yes, I won't linger on that much longer, but you can see it's quite an interesting chart still. It's got what we call a cradle. Can everyone see the cradle at the top? running between the opposition of Venus and Uranus, which is no small thing in itself. That's relationship dynamic, to say the least. That's changes in relationship, that's sudden shifts. And it can be something like you're planning to do one thing and suddenly you're doing something entirely different. It's not a, you know, I'm quite a fan of Uranus, but one should always respect all the outer planets, all the transpersonals, I should say. But they're in their opposition, and by being in that opposition, they enable this lovely pattern, which we're going to explore more, which is the harmony between Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, to turn into what we call a cradle. Can you see the cradle formation? Look at the red line between Venus and Uranus. Red line. And look at all these dotted sextiles around it. Look, that's called a cradle. If you turn it upside down, you can see it's a cradle. And you sometimes get that 3 sextiles around an opposition. Fabulous aspect. Creative is all better. So this is a very creative full moon. Just, in my case, just shut up, zip them out. Yeah, so it's because it includes Uranus, you see, because Uranus in a harmonious angle to both Neptune and Pluto is a rare treat that we're getting. Uranus had to get to late Taurus before that happened. It's only recently. And they're going to shift together more or less over a 2-year period. So at the moment, we're getting this earth water cradle. And then later on, it's going to shift into fire and air. Interesting times. And we'll explore more of the significance of that later. So let's move on, because I can be a bit slow sometimes. So let us explore the domicile rulers. In other words, the rulers. Domicile is just the old-fashioned word used for their home signs. The exaltations, which, as I said, are maybe underused. The exaltations have a certain... I started looking more and more at the patterns. I noticed, hold on a second, all 4 cardinal signs are exaltations. So all 4 of the cardinal signs, because it's not as if all the signs get to be exalted. So all 4 cardinal signs are exaltations. So we already know that Mars is exalted in earthy Capricorn, cardinal. Jupiter is exalted in watery Cancer, cardinal. The sun itself is exalted in fiery Aries, fire cardinal, which leaves the sun we've got exalted in Aries.
Libra.
Saturn, you got it. Saturn's exalted in Libra. The Saturn-Venus link. Very interesting. The exaltations are the links that start to... And so these are, I think, are the main things. It's interesting things like propensity rulers and getting into all the little minor degree patterns and so on. But I'm more interested in the rulers, the exaltations, which planets, when you look at a chart, are speaking strongly, most strongly. And that's got a lot to do with position. The strongest positions in the chart, you know, one of my quips is the link between astrology and real estate, not so different. Position really matters. You know, the 1st, the 4th, the 7th and the 10th, the strongest, and then you've got others that come close, you know, the 9th and 5th and so on. And what other planets are they speaking through? And this is where rulerships come in. So at the moment, we have had Uranus, nearly its whole 8 years of it, because it's getting towards the end, of Venus speaking through Uranus, because it's been in Taurus all that time. So Venus is speaking through Uranus. And I was thinking, that's interesting, because it must only be in this Uranus cycle that the whole gender thing has gone viral. You know, there's this whole thing of people who have to now be called they, and because they're living with their 2 genders and so on. You know, I'm terribly uninformed, but I sort of notice these things in between picking up newspapers and occasionally watching the news, which I despise. But more likely newspapers, a bit of online stuff. And there's been huge, and it would only be in the years in which Uranus and Taurus that the interesting changes, a whole new level of gender. And this is one of the things I love about astrology and gender. There's been astrologers over the years that have tried to make you know, to take offense at the fact of the masculine, feminine astrology thing. It's critical to the system. And it's not gender, it's not biological gender. And that's where it gets interesting when you look at rulerships. And the other thing before we leave this page is aversions. And that's, someone was mentioning a yod. Now the 150-degree angle, and a yod is only when you've got 250-degree angles pointing at a single poor little planet that's got two quincunxes pointing at it, and the two that are pointing at it are 60 degrees apart. So they're ganging up, basically. They're pals, 60 degrees apart, and they're pointing at a third point. And then it gets to be called the finger of God, the yod, pointing. That planet on the finger must adjust. That doesn't mean it's easy. It must adjust. I've got one of those points at my moon. Great fun. So that's called aversions, because you see the word aspect means to see. It just means to see. Aspects see each other. And the whole thing was worked out initially from what sees the ascendant. Well, what you don't see is the ones that are only 30 degrees apart, too close to properly see. In other words, the signs next to each other, and the ones on either side of your opposition, the 150s. And the overall word for that is aversion. It's sort of like you're averting your eyes. You have no choice. And basically, I think it's easy to say they just don't get each other. Quincunxes and semi-sextiles. And most of us have some serious semi-sextiles because it is so common for Venus or Mercury to be only 30 degrees from your sun. Super common, because they can't go far from the sun, particularly Mercury. So it's interesting. It's an energy that you have, but it doesn't necessarily get your lot. So your life purpose might be very Aries like me, but I've got this Venus in Taurus, as many Aries do have. Or the Gemini, who's a full-on Gemini, but he's got this Mercury in Cancer, which somewhat, it adds another whole energy, but that doesn't mean those two energies get each other. It means they contribute to the whole, but in some senses, they just, you know, it's the part of this many selves. We are many selves. So aversions, fascinating. So these I consider to be my prime focus that I take from the traditional astrology. And here's the example from rulerships and exaltation, which overall are called dignities, which is a nice rubric. It's their dignified place to be. Sun's only dignified in masculine fire. That's because it rules Leo and it's exalted in Aries. That's it, because Sun is the masculine archetype personified. Self-consciousness, I am me, Sun. I shine like this, Sun. Moon, the exact opposite archetype, dignified in feminine water and earth. So it reaches out to both of the feminine. Rules Cancer, exalted in Taurus. And this symmetrical elemental dance, symmetry, when you look up the word symmetry, I gave a talk, if some of you came to it, you'll recognise I've sort of continued on that theme and going a bit further with it. The word symmetry actually translates, anything can be a symmetry that is a crossing of the circle. So you can take a circle and you can create literally thousands of symmetries if you just keep putting, but they've all got to go through the centre. So it's only a symmetry when it goes through the centre of the circle. We call that an opposition in astrology, and that's exactly what the rest of the planets do for their rulerships. So they all rule one feminine, one masculine sign. Not the sun, because it's the prime masculine, not the moon, because it's the prime feminine. But this is why astrological gender, which has nothing to do with biological gender, is so incredibly important. There's a story in this, isn't there? There's a mystery in this, that they all rule a feminine and a masculine sign. Venus, Libra masculine, Taurus feminine. Mars, Scorpio feminine, Aries masculine. On it goes. So gender alternation rules. So it's like this, because the thing about astrology, the more you go back, and particularly the Greek, so much of the traditional astrology comes from really from the ancient Greek era, you know, that's those sort of few hundred years pre-Christianity. And their mathematics was pretty sophisticated. And there is a mathematical basis very often that links through to the actual movement of the planet. And the symbols often then are perfectly linked to the maths. Venus is the obvious one. Now, Venus is the one that, you know, makes the 5-pointed star every 8 years as she does her retrograde cycles. And she's the planet of order and beauty. Yeah, she actually, but Mercury makes a triangle through its cycles with its 3. Yeah, so it's not only Venus, but Venus is, you know, the really compelling one. So alternation rules and movement and mystery go together, because what alternation is, it's movement. It's moving from one end to the other. It's to get the whole picture, just like the eclipses aren't about one end or the other. It's not the good end and the bad end. It's part of the circle of riding the dragon. Get both ends. Let the tail and the head meet. And that's the only thing that doesn't change while you're in a body, while you're a human life. Only change doesn't change. Yes, there is people like me with Jupiter in Pisces believe that there is an eternal energy of some kind, have a sense of a source. But the only thing we're actually likely to be aware of in terms of our day-to-day life is that change is the only thing that doesn't change. You know, everything changes. And in that is so much of the mystery. It's our relatively short time here that makes it that much more mysterious and magical. And Hermes, Mercury, the one exception, still has a masculine and feminine, right? Mercury rules both Virgo feminine and masculine Gemini, but only Mercury has Virgo as its exaltation. So Virgo does double duty for Mercury only, because Mercury's movement personified. Hermes, Mercury, the god that could move between the worlds. So there's this mingling of the mathematics of actual planetary movements, the ancient stories that go back, you know, not just to the ancient Greeks, because you can find the precedents in the Sumerian and Babylonian times. You've got Inanna and you've got Ereshkigal and you've got all these extraordinary figures that go back hundreds and hundreds of years, even before the ancient Greeks. So we've got these stories that blend in. We've got the actual motions of the mathematics of the planets that somehow come through. And then out of this wonderful kind of cosmic soup, we get these lovely traditional systems that have been layered and built upon for years. And I find it rather terrific. And the fact that Mercury is the exception and is allowed to actually have a rulership and an exaltation in the same sign. And it tells you that the best place you can have Mercury, obviously, is Virgo. And I think that this is that deep delving of our planet patterns that open us to the mysteries within ourselves. So the symmetry, democratic, I've been talking this anyway, the sun, the queen of the night, the sun, the bringer of, the moon, sorry, queen of the night, the sun, the bringer of light. And is the white good to read on a blue background? Yeah.
I'm going to try and move that little black box. Try and get rid of that.
Yeah, it's blocking it for you as well. Yeah, you just cross it out, can't you?
That's the best we know.
Yeah, you shrink it. Just shrink it. Oh, good one. Yay. Well done. That's terrific. Much better. And we know, yes, masculine personified sun, feminine personified moon. And then this is just the listing of those things that I was saying. You know, Saturn's got Capricorn with its earthy practical skills, and it's got Aquarius with this incredible resonance with community and protecting, leading, forming, serving, whatever. Jupiter in Pisces, the feminine face of Jupiter, fertile emotions, feelings, this imaginative, you know, the sense of the imagination as a presence. And then Jupiter in Sagittarius, which is more the adventurer, but it's also inclusive and inspired. Mars in Scorpio, braves the depths. and Mars is actually given, I'm not going into triplicities, but I thought it was worth mentioning that it's given rulership of the watery triplicity as a part of traditional astrology. And Scorpio braves those depths. It's a strong, strong Mars. And that suggests it's a little bit stronger than Mars in Aries. Mars in Aries, warrior, vital energy. Venus in Taurus. Well, you know, the nature goddess, the fecund side, the attraction to life's rhythms and the production of life. And Venus in Libra, well, that links very strongly with Venus's emergence. You know, Venus is beauty personified. When she's born, she emerges fully formed in her beauteous presence. And of course, the story is wonderful, and I'll get into that a bit later, of how she came to emerge fully formed. Mercury in Virgo. This is very much Mercury moving between the worlds. Gemini is more the trickster side of Mercury.
Well, let Kate in, but she's.
Kate, I knew I wouldn't see them once I was talking. Yes, you're all going to have to tell me. Come on in, Kate. Sorry, Kate. Come earlier next time. I'm the worst person for coming late, I can tell you. That's why I can joke about it. Okay, so Mercury in Gemini, trickster, messenger, and we'll go into the trickster. If you don't know the stories of Mercury as a trickster, it's wonderful. Greek mythology is wonderful, and it's incredible how the planets got redefined just between the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. Quite a big redefinition. Now, why isn't it moving on my...
Maybe just click on somewhere, just so you got that screen. Yeah, just anywhere there.
Huh. The dance of elemental life. Isn't that a gorgeous dolphin shot? Mm. Yes, because any beautiful thing you see, you look at it and you realise, yep, all four elements are there. There's the sun for fire, and there's the sky for airs, and there's the water, and there's the dolphin. What an amazing embodiment of earthy life that is. I love dolphins. I once was catching a little wave and I looked beside me and a dolphin was swimming next to me. Oh. Links between exalted planets and their stories. So let's get a little bit more into the stories, which are so much a part of this mystery. Now, why are these things linked? Well, it's kind of starts to look obvious they're linked when you put them up and look this way. So Moon is exalted. So there's our first link, Moon Venus. Now, Moon Venus are the feminine lights. They're the feminine goddesses, the mother, the erotic feminine of Venus and the maternal feminine of the Moon. And as lights, they are the feminine lights big time. You want to get outside now and see Venus while she's evening star, you know, straight after the sun sets in the west. Whoa. And that's meant to be Venus in her lover phase because it's nighttime. We're seeing her in the night sky. And she's meant to be more her warrior phase when she's the morning star rising before, leading the sun. And for Moon to be exalted in Venus' sign, of course, it's a natural. The feminine lights belong together. But then it gets Venus-Jupiter, because Venus is exalted in Jupiter's sign of Pisces. Well, these two are linked as being the benefics. Venus is considered the lesser benefic, and Jupiter is considered the greater benefic. Certainly a lot bigger. And does that mean that you're getting the best of Venus? There's this whole mystery around the exaltations, as I said. Does this mean that you're getting the best of Venus when she's exalted in Jupiter's sign, when she's in Pisces? It's certainly an extraordinarily loving, caring, compassionate Venus, and a very imaginative, creative Venus, but then so is Venus in Taurus, just in a more earthy way, and so is Venus in Libra. But Venus in Pisces is perhaps, it's going back to her origins, because the origins of Venus, the reason she gets to emerge fully formed in a seashell and all the little nymphs blow her to shore to an island, is because Saturn, Kronos, Greek mythology, because this is a Greek myth, Kronos, He's the one that Gaia, Mother Earth, has decided that her partner, Uranus, is not going to bury any more of his children. He's been sending them all to Tartarus, everyone that was born, chucking them down there in the depths of Tartarus. So she tricks him. She keeps Kronos for herself. She gives him something he thinks is Saturn. And then what does Saturn do when she tells him to? She gives him the sickle. She gives Saturn the famous sickle. And while the Uranus father, heavenly father, is covering Mother Earth, Gaia, Saturn wields his sickle. He emasculates his dad. The genitals fall into the sea. They mix with the foam of the water, and out of that foam arises fully formed Venus in all of her beauty. Beauty is born. So isn't that an interesting birth for beauty? And doesn't it give a slightly different light to Saturn? You know, Saturn is one of the favourite planets to be vilified. But Saturn is an essential for like anything. You know, the Saturn part of our chart is that part of our chart that forces us to build and hold and persevere and endure. And Saturn is the great holder, the builder of foundation. But then there's this other side that emerges with the Kronos story, that through Saturn's desire to become the new great leader, become the new lord of the earth, as opposed to his sky father, Venus was born. And of course, Uranus sounds a lot like Uranus. It's not spelt the same, but it's tempting to kind of conflate the two. It's OU. Given that at the moment we've got, is that now or is that the full moon? That was the full moon. Right on the full moon of October 17, we've got Venus opposite Uranus, which creates that cradle that I was talking about. It allows the outer planet three-way sextile to take shape as cradle. So yes, it's cause for thought about the nature of Saturn, because Saturn is also said to have ruled the Golden Age. When he was in charge, when Kronos was in charge, it was the Golden Age, because everyone had what they needed. Not too much, not too little, but what they needed. Interesting. But of course, he fell foul to fear that it was going to be done to him, so he swallowed his children. Until, again, the mother goddess said, enough. And Jupiter, Zeus, became the new lord of the world after some long battlings. So it's a very interesting mythology, and given that these mythologies were also, in terms of the ancient Greek mythology, was a part of a culture that was sophisticated in terms of observation of the stars and mathematics, it is, I think it's wrong to think that the mathematics and the stories are separate. I think there's probably much more merging than we know. There's this wonderful book called The Matrix of Creation by this guy called Richard Heath, and I've sort of read it about 4 times already, and my brain doesn't quite, I remember it, you know, while I'm reading it, and then it just doesn't stick. But he goes through the mathematical correlations between planets, and some of you might have brains more appropriate to Richard Heath's work. It's sort of like the sacred geometry thing of that, the movement of the planets. The Matrix of Creation, it's called. So Jupiter moon. Jupiter exalted in Cancer. That too goes right back to the stories of Zeus. One, he was constantly hiding and lying to Hera. Well, he wasn't lying. He was just disappearing and becoming swans and horses and any other darn thing he wanted to become to get whatever woman he was after, because one of his roles was to impregnate and fertilize as many people as he could. You know, his offspring were numerous. Certain offspring, yes, with Hera, but offspring all over the place with various water deities and humans. And so that link with, because Cancer is the great mother, but so that link with the maternal feminine, his intense fertility, you know, he only had to have one role with someone that he met, Hera and the swan, was it Hera? Was that her? Not Hera, Leda. Hera's the wife, Leda and the swan, yeah. It was always just one coupling and the child would be born.
Twins in that case.
Twins in that case, yes. So, so you can see the Cancer link there, the moon fertility, but also this whole story of Hera, his other half. She was actually a powerful figure in her own right. That's why he had to hide from it.
And ironically, she rules marriage.
Say that again?
I said, and ironically, she rules marriage.
Yes, yes, it is sort of ironic, isn't it? And things do change with the formalization. She represents the formalization of love. And the interesting thing about Venus is that the Venus archetypes appear to predate the male, because when you go right back to the Sumerian, Babylonian cultures, the Akkadians, they were matriarchal cultures. And that's where those extraordinary stories of it was Inanna that had to make the descent. She was like the Pluto figure. Well, not really, but Erishkigal was the Pluto figure. She ruled the underworld. But there was, these are like the precursors of Venus. And Venus, if you look at the history of her birth, she was born from the genitals of the Sky Father. She's older than the other gods and goddesses. So she's a very sort of ancient energy. So Jupiter exalted in Cancer and the maternal feminine, it makes sense. Anyone got Jupiter in Cancer? It's a strong place for Jupiter. Saturn, Venus. Now there's another sort of whole array of stories that put together the ancient one and what they call the hetera, the young erotic woman, the hetera. It's sort of like a nicer word than prostitute. It doesn't mean prostitute. It meant a sexual, nubile young woman, which is the Venus figure. And she was there's many stories where she's the companion of this ancient old figure, which of course is a Saturn figure. And exalted in Libra. Nice. The ancient wise one and the hetera, but also Saturn's link to the birth of Aphrodite. So we've got obvious sort of links there. And then we get to Mars Saturn, because Mars is exalted in Saturn's sign. But when you go back to the matriarchal cultures that predate the Hellenistic, where everything had become more patriarchal, Mars was both an agricultural god and a shepherd. So he was the servant of nature. So this is a pretty, it brings that, that kind of face of Mars that hooks to the mystery side of Saturn, because Capricorn, remember, the ancient symbol of Capricorn isn't a goat, it's a mergoat with the fish's tail, because that's Saturn's role, is to dive into Earth's mysteries and swim in Earth's mysteries. And then we get Sun Mars. Sun exalted in Aries, and just as Moon and Venus are the feminine lights, then Sun and Mars are the masculine lights. And that's an interesting one. In terms of Greek mythology, Sun was most depicted by Apollo. Wasn't it Apollo, the one that rode the horses through, and he carried the sun, and he was famous for seeing everything that was hidden. He'd be the one who'd tell on. I think people thought they had a secret. That's how it was revealed that Aphrodite, Venus, and Ares, Mars were actually quietly having a very nice affair. Thank you. It was Apollo that saw it and told Zeus, told the goddesses. Everyone stood around, and some of the goddesses were very angry about it. But Mercury said, "Hermes, I wish it was me." Because what happened is they got captured in this golden net in their full nudity, caught in the act, and it didn't stop anything. It just It's an interesting story.
But it's kind of ironic because the person that made the neck is one of the ugliest gods and can't walk, is married to Venus.
Yeah. Yes, he was crippled,
Yeah.
but he was the maker of beautiful things. He was the Hephaestus. Yeah. So he made magnificent objects. He was he was, what was it called? The smith? Is it the smith?
Vulcan, the blacksmith of the gods.
The blacksmith, yes. So he would be using fire and metal and made these magnificent things. And so he made a golden net that he hid where they met when he found out what was going on. And then he pulled the net up and they were caught in the golden net for all to see. And it sort of backfired on him, as revelations so often do. So Sun, Apollo, Aries, the link with Aries and Zeus and Hera is that they were embarrassed by him. He was violent. The Greeks made no temples to Mars. There was a little tiny one in a complex that was called a temple to Ares. It's called Ares. But because he was considered violent. But in the case of Hephaestus, he was somehow hurled from heaven, wasn't he? And that's how he came to become crippled. He'd been thrown from a great height. But yeah.
It was Hera's son, wasn't it?
Yes. Mars, Aries, yes. Hephaestus, yes. Yes. And for some reason he was, maybe she thought he was ugly and she threw him out, and then he became crippled as well. But in Ari's case, she just avoided him as much as she could, and everyone was sort of embarrassed by because he was violent, brutish, not civilized. So opposition, which is actually the symmetry. And we get this symmetry through rulerships. And so again, this is to look at these things. Moon, Saturn have got that symmetry. Moon rules Cancer, opposite Saturn's Capricorn. And Saturn gets to do the symmetry with both lights. Saturn's sign is opposite the moon in the form of Capricorn, and it's opposite the sun in the form of Aquarius. So Saturn's the big guy when it comes to the lights in terms of their symmetry. But Saturn's the world builder. And of course, the Saturn cycles can't be denied. Very few people don't remember a Saturn return or two. Yes. And there we have Sun, Saturn, Leo, Aquarius. And of course, in some ways, the solar returns are the yearly inner journey, where the Saturn's return, of course, you have to wait till 29 and call it astrological maturity, because many things have happened by then. It's a real coming together of your lifetime, those years. In many ways, when I say their returns up the top there, I meant the progressed moon return, sorry. So from 27.5, we get our progressed moon return. You really come into your moon at your progressed moon return, about 27.5. And just, then you're moving into your Saturn return. So it's a hugely important period of life, that 27 to 30. Progressed moon return, Saturn return. Sun, Saturn, it's the yearly as opposed to the 29 yearly. Venus, Mars, well, of course, the love affair. They've got two lots of opposites. Aries, Libra, and Taurus, Scorpio. So they're truly symmetrical opposites in terms of their rulerships. But you'll notice through their exaltations, they have a link, because Mars is exalted in Capricorn and Venus is exalted in Pisces. So they're getting the sextile, the lovely connection of water and earth through their exaltations, but through their rulerships, they're doubly opposite. They're doubly symmetrical. So this is telling us about their natural attraction of opposites, the civilized beauty and the wild energy of, he's closer to nature, which is why it isn't surprising that he's come from being a vegetation god and a shepherd, because it's the Romans who love Mars. They built temples everywhere. They made him the prime god. They demoted Venus to being his wife. They turned Eros, her son into Cupid, who never grew up. So the Romans kind of played up Mars and gave us the name Mars, of course, and gave us the name Venus from Aphrodite. So there's quite a lot of changing went on there. But the really interesting thing is the 32nd birthday. That's when you get your Venus and Mars return together, and you get it again at 64, every 32 years in the week of your birthday. Your Venus returns correctly, because a proper Venus return only happens every 8 years. That's when Venus is not just back in sign, she's back in phase. That's a Venus return. Venus is back every 225 days, is it? The normal rotation of the sun. But no, that's not a return. Well, it's her back in the same degree. But for you personally to have your Venus not only back in the sign and degree of your birth, but the phase, she's either a night star or an evening star or underworld. For that to happen, that happens every 8 years, every 8th birthday, 8, 16. But at 32, the Mars return catches up. And it takes another 32 years. And the Mars return catches up again. And that's when you learn the most about your Venus-Mars pattern in your own chart. They're super significant. Because it can be that your Venus and Mars don't get each other. I've got Mars in Aries and Venus in Taurus. They're both strong, but they don't get each other. So, and that's the thing about aversion. They can be both strong, they've both got jobs to do, but if they try to get in each other's way, not pretty, they'll basically reduce each other's potency because they don't see each other. That's aversion. It's very interesting. The semi-sextile is in many ways more interesting because they're so common. You know, with our fast-moving planets to be nearer. Some people haven't got, a Venus or a Mercury in the sign on either side, but many of us do. So yes, the Venus-Mars story is fully there in your face at 32, 64. And then the Mercury-Jupiter, another one of these double opposites. Gemini opposite Sagittarius, Mercury's Gemini, Jupiter's Sag, and Virgo opposite Pisces. And they, of course, have complementary roles when it comes to how we communicate, how we use our mind. So Mercury has all of that ability to do the quick, on-the-spot stuff, where Jupiter wants to ponder. Jupiter wants to embrace the bigger picture. Jupiter wants to ignore some things entirely and go for meaning being, and meaning's not such a big thing for Mercury. Meaning is secondary to effectiveness, detail, practicality, and how you make it work, how you get it operational. Jupiter can sometimes not get it done about operational. I think I'm out of here. It says Jupiter in Sage. This is, Jupiter in Pisces. Oh no, I can't do that. I'll leave it till later. Oh my God, later's come and gone. So consider the shift. Oh, we've got someone else trying to come in, have we? Oh no, that's just the message covering is it covering? Yeah. How did that happen? Can I pull it? The wonders of a touch screen. Who would have thought? Okay. So I love this image. This was taken on one of the far Northland beaches. These wonderful, wonderful stones as I live in Auckland, but whenever possible, I go to Northland, which is divine, the top of the North Island in New Zealand. And gradually got this little place, this little one-bedroom place up in Cable Bay, and gradually, it's only an hour and a half from the top, and gradually we're sort of going to more and more of the little beaches between us and the top of the North Island. And that was one of these wonderful little beaches. Not sure where the fire photo came from, but it's great, isn't it? It's molten lava. Oh, just wouldn't want to be in its path. So that's the shift. That's the shift, folks, that we're all very close to. The shift from Pluto in Capricorn, longest of all, 20 years. Neptune in Pisces, still quite long, close to 13 years. Uranus in Taurus, bit over 8 years. They're all shifting. And that's why we're already getting these lovely sextiles and trines, which I'm calling a talent trine. I'm just following the German school idea that the two trines in the case of Aquarius, which will be at home in Pluto on the 20th of November, there to stay for 19 more years, and Gemini, which takes quite a while for you, much longer for Uranus to get there. It's back and forth till 2026. They're going to be in a nice trine, and they're going to be holding Saturn, sorry, they're going to be holding Neptune in Aries as their midpoint, which the German school calls a talent trine. And ever since I heard that, I've adopted it because it focuses the complementary energy very well to have a fire base for an air top or an earth base, as we're getting at the moment. We're getting Taurus and Capricorn because they've all caught up with each other already, ready to move. Taurus and Capricorn, we're getting making that talent trine at the moment to Pisces, which is Neptune's strongest place. That'll change when Neptune gets to Aries. How it will change? Because it just so happens that the meeting of Neptune and Saturn, which only happens every 35 to 36 years, is happening on 0 degrees of Aries. So it's part of this whole shifting story. Saturn won't be around for as long, but it's in the picture well through 2025. And I think it pops up, I've got the dates here, I think it pops up a last time to hook in 26 as well. But then Neptune, Uranus and Pluto will go on well into 2028, holding their harmonies. So it's a pretty special shift, this. It's not just that we're moving from earth and water of the Capricorn, Taurus, Pisces to the air and fire of the Gemini, Aquarius, Aries. It's not just that. It's the fact that this doesn't happen very often. Yes, Neptune and Pluto has been in harmony since the 1940s, and we've still got years of it to run because Neptune and Pluto only meet every 500 years. So that's why it's taking so long just to get through their sextile phase in their development. Because 500 years is a long time between meetings. Mao Zedong, born on the late 1800s. So this is a special planetary pattern that is starting now and which perfects in the air and fire signs. So it's a sort of new era stuff. Oh. So somehow, because I've moved this.
Click on click anywhere on the screen, on the pictures or whatever, and then
Right, so touch the screen and that frees up. So when planets shift from earth, water to air, fire. Now we know that the first shift is really soon, 20th of November. That's Pluto's final settling in Aquarius. The other's going to take a bit longer, but not that much longer. Pluto began, I think, I've got it here somewhere. I think it began back in like May 2023. It's way back. Is it something like that? I've got it here somewhere. I know it was, because Pluto's slowest, so it's going to take a long time going between Capricorn and Aquarius. So there we have our shifts, which I've already talked about, so we'll just move on. Slowly, our shifting story. So here we go. Pluto settles on the November the 20th for our time zone. The slow dance between Aquarius and late Capricorn, has ensued since May 2023. The high spot on entry, yes, I looked at the chart of their entry and it was a square to Jupiter in Taurus back then in May 2023. But it upped its intensity this year on January 21. Sun and Pluto entered Aquarius together. Some of you probably noticed that, went, whoa. On the day the Sun entered Aquarius this year, 2024, which I should have said there, but I didn't. The Sun and Pluto entered Aquarius. Now, the ruler Saturn is still in charge. So we get 5 years of Saturn being in charge when planets go from Capricorn to Aquarius, 2.5 years of one and 2.5 years of the next. But Uranus complexity comes in as a secondary ruler. And of course, Uranus itself will be in sextile to Pluto as well as being its secondary ruler. So that certainly doesn't suggest an era in which things won't change. Neptune first reaches Aries on the 30th of March next year, not that long away. But of course, it's going to take a long time to settle. It returns to Pisces on the 22nd of October of the same year, 2025. And then it finally settles in Aries, January 27, 2026. And you can see Uranus is the slowest. That's why I've put it last. It reaches Gemini for the first time in July of next year. So it's the last of the big three to shift sign. July 7 next year. Still less than a year away. And it returns to Taurus in November the 8th of that year, having been there for a few months. Finally settling in Gemini on the 26th of April, 2026. That's got a nice resonance to it, doesn't it? So April 26, 2026, Uranus finally settles. And at that point, all three are fully settled. Now, Uranus obviously for the shorter time, but because it's still a very slow planet, that's why they're holding these sextile aspects, because they do their retrograde cycles and Uranus is still slow, not as slow as them, but still slow. So let's explore the new rulers of our Trinity. I love this Trinity picture. Aquarius, Gemini, Aries. So what we've had is or having, not had, it's not past tense, sorry. What we're having, because Pluto's still in Capricorn, is we've got Saturn ruling Capricorn. We've got Jupiter as the main ruler of Pisces. Neptune, the secondary ruler in it, which is the strongest Neptune can be in any of its transits. And, of course, we've got, now I've lost myself. Uranus, Venus. We're losing Venus. We're losing Venus as ruler when it comes to this new cycle. Yes. And that has been interesting because, as I said, some interesting things around Venusian issues like gender have taken on a whole new shape during the Uranus, however you want to say it, 8 years, 8 and a bit years. So Saturn, ruler number 1, which has already been ruling for 2.5 years or nearly. Some of the ways in which Kronos Saturn plays. Well, wisdom through adversity, I think, is the most obvious and experienced Saturn fact. You get Saturn has a special kind of wisdom, without a doubt. Saturn's linked to wisdom, but it's through adversity. It's through the hard things that we get our Saturn wisdom. That's why not many people forget their first Saturn return. I'm not saying it's bad. It can be things like the birth of a baby, but that's not exactly unmemorable. It can be things like the sudden collapse of a long-term marriage. It can be things like sometimes I've seen it being the death of a parent. It can be the building of a brand new business. It can be the sudden realization that what you've been doing for years is just not fitting. But whatever it is, the Saturn return is big. And with luck, we get some wisdom from it. But it's big. And as I said, it comes after your progressed lunar return. So that 27.5 to 30 period is quite often time when women have children and they go through the whole thing of pregnancy, birth, the reality, the hard reality of the baby, all of that in those years, quite commonly. But it can be many, many things. And then, of course, we've got the classic, well, the mergoat, sea goat is very much the Capricorn, the 10th, what we've already said, you know, this is Saturn going deeper than the surface, going down, you know, Saturn as the lead, as the carrier of Earth's wisdom. And I love this diagram because you notice he's got wings, and all of the older Saturn depictions, when he was Kronos, I might add, he had wings because he's being recognized as the god that he is, but he's also there standing next to death because he's the one who calls the time. He's the time lord. He's the one who says your time's up, mate. Thus the story of him swallowing his children. He handled it not by burying them somewhere, but by actually swallowing them. And time swallows us. This is reality. And that little thing that's written down the bottom, tempus erit, that means the time will come. That's definitely a Saturn motif. The time will come. But he's also the Lord of the Golden Age and the 11th, which fits with the sort of, you know, the power of a sort of stable community where everyone seems to have what they want. He also emasculates his father, cuts off the genitals to claim power, but in the process, beauty is born. And planet Saturn is soon to meet Neptune at 0 degrees Aries, which is rather interesting because obviously they meet every 35 to 36 years, but to meet at 0 degrees Aries, that's a real big beginning thing.
When does that happen?
Well, we're about to get, I think I put some, it's not that exact 0 degrees until 2026, but they do orbs in 2025, and I think I've got it soon. So Mercury Hermes plays in Gemini. Hermes is, and I love this Hermes image, very much Hermes, not Mercury, as you can see. See all the things where arrows and things have been put aside and warriors are kind of sitting on the ground. This is Hermes' wisdom over war. That's the particular, because Hermes, you see, had many, many roles. And one of them, well-known ones, is Hermes Psychopomp. Hermes who could go down into the underworld when other people couldn't without dying. He could come back. But this is Hermes' wisdom over war. It's a lovely one. And he's spinning the world on his fingers. He's saying, use wisdom, not war. So I thought, we need this. We need this Hermes. This is the Hermes we need. Yes, please. Let's be the Hermes. The twins of heart and head, the third. The most obviously dual of the dual signs, Gemini, the twins of heart and head. Particularly if Mercury happens to be in, see, about a third of Geminis have Mercury in Cancer or Mercury in Taurus, and the duality is so clear through that ruling planet. See, the other signs, it's rarer to have the ruler so close to the sun. It can happen more, the next people to get it most often are the Librans and Taurians, because it's Venus, and she's quick too, not as quick as Mercury. But after that, it's just total, you know, Mars is 26 months. It could be anywhere. And when it comes to Saturn, you know, Saturn's in your sign, you're born during an era in which you're having, you know, Saturn's on its 29-year visit to your sign. So getting the ruler of your sign in your sign becomes more and more rare as you go through, you know, once you move away from Venus's signs and Mercury's signs. So that links to the third domicile in terms of all the qualities of the third sign, the third domicile. And then the other is the sixth. And that's another thing that Mercury does that the other planets don't. There's a square between the two things that rules. If you look at the others, you'll find Libra and Taurus don't see each other. They're quincunx. That's the two Venus rules. Then Mars rules Scorpio and Aries, don't see each other, quincunx. But Jupiter and Hermes are different. They get the squares. So Hermes, wisdom over war, the twins of heart and head, the third, and then 3 signs away, Virgo. Serves, heals, works, suffers. This is the hard working side of Mercury. And it's also where Mercury is exalted. And then one of the qualities that comes through with the stories, with the Greek mythology, is this extraordinary birth of Mercury, of Hermes. Some of you would know it, I imagine, how he's a baby. He's not like Venus. He's not born adult. He's born as a little baby, and he's in his crib, and he's in his swaddling clothes. And when no one's looking, he leaps out of his crib, and he rushes off, and he steals the whole herd of his brother Apollo's cattle. A whole herd of cattle. He puts special feathers or something on his feet, and he walks backwards to a cave, and he hides all the cattle there. Then he scuttles back to his bassinet, I'm just a little baby. It's just a fabulous trickster archetype from the moment he was born.
I think that's what it.
And he manages to, that's the clever thing, the winning allies. That's the super duper thing. He just happens, he knows he's going to get caught, right? He knows, and sure enough, an old shepherd had seen him and puts him into a pile. I saw this baby, go figure. And by the time he's confronted by his brother, he's ripped off the shell of some poor innocent tortoise, and he's got the tortoise shell. He's strung it with gut, and he's created the first lion, which is a good word for Mercury, but it's the L-Y-R-E, this beautiful musical instrument. He gives it to his brother, who immediately loves it, who takes him on as his best and fondest, forgives him immediately, gets his cattle back, has the musical instrument. And this is the nature of Hermes. And Hermes is always out helping people, but there's never an emotional link. It's like the job's to be done, and he does it. And if it requires trickery and lies, he does. And what about that thing they had on Rhodes? They called it a herm, didn't they? Wasn't that called a herm? And it was just a phallus. Is that right? Yeah, and it was meant.
At crossroads.
It was put at the crossroads. Yeah. Yeah, interesting. So very good at trickster, being the trickster, winning allies. And if you think about it, only mutable signs. Mutable earth doubled, mutable air. Fully mutable being, our Mercury, our Hermes. And of course, able to move between the worlds. And that's what Zeus really valued him for, and everyone valued him for, because he was the one who was able to go down to get something, to help someone, to do whatever, to take a message to Hades, the ruler of the underworld. It was the Romans that called him Pluto. The hermaphrodite, I think, was meant to be one of Hermes' trysts with some goddess, and that, I think, was the creation. Was it Hermes and Aphrodite? Was it there? It sure sounds like it, doesn't it? It must be. It must be Hermes and Aphrodite. Hermes and, yeah, that makes sense. Has to be, doesn't it?
Themselves.
No, Hermes wasn't a hermaphrodite, but he was a very, no, it was him saying, oh, I wish it was me, you know, when Venus is in the net. He was male, but he was sort of always this young sort of figure who he was a shapeshifter. He was a shapeshifter. Yeah. Yeah. If he needed to be a woman for a while to achieve something. Yeah. Now I liked this because this is a very ancient Roman statue of, it's sort of much less sort of violent looking than most of the ones where he's got the big beard and there's, you know, because as I said, the Romans loved Mars. Mars was the prime god because they were a warlike people who were constantly taking new territory. So Mars was the guy. But the generic thing of Mars at Aries is that warrior survivor. The warrior is not just a warrior, the warrior is a survivor. And it represents wild force, wild nature. Not civilized nature, wild nature. The initiator and the warrior, very much for the first, you know, the Aries face of Mars, and then the depths and the psychic. I've always found Scorpios in general, but particularly some Scorpios, you know, have got a bit more chance of having their ruler in their sign, because at least it's only 26 months, who are born with Sun in Scorpio and Mars in Scorpio. Psychic detective, big time. There's just this natural affinity knowing it. And then, of course, Mars is warrior god. Was, as I already said, was embarrassed his parents, embarrassed Hera and Zeus, because they didn't want a violent child. They didn't like to have violence. They didn't say they couldn't do violence, but they didn't want it to be publicly demonstrated as he went around. And thus his prime god. But I think it's very interesting that that whole wild force thing makes a lot of sense when you realise the ancient gods were vegetation, and he was also, I've covered it over, but he was the shepherd, he was the protector of nature. Now, how are we going for time? Okay, because we're just coming to the final chart that I want you to look at to see the three planets.
No, he was the ancient god of vegetation.
Yeah, that you have to go right back to the matriarchal cultures for that. Yeah, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, the Akkadians. Yeah, fascinating. And that's where you get the whole, all the very different Venus figures as well, because you know, she's. Symbols are not arbitrary, they participate in what they depict. I think it's not an arbitrary thing that we have our planets composed of circles, half circles, and crosses. And I think it's very interesting to look at them and consider, we haven't got time to do that now, but to consider the difference of Venus having the cross of matter underneath the circle of spirit, Mars having that, which is like activated matter, that arrow above the circle of spirit, Jupiter having the crescent of soul on the side of the cross of matter. These are really interesting symbols when you start to consider the planets, and just to look at your own planets that way and think of them in terms of that combination of symbolic energies. Because a symbol is only a symbol. It's only truly a symbol when it's pointing beyond itself. If not, it's just a sign. This is Rome, you know. So symbols guide us to liminal realms, you know, the realms between, in between realms, to the Venus-ruled realm of the creative imagination, what the Sufis called the alam al-mithal. And they see Venus as being that personified as a planet. And this is Richard Heath that I'm talking about it. Richard Heath has written that terrific book in which he talks about the way in which the golden mean is linked to the spiral form, and the spiral form has this way of just occurring in plants, in galaxies, the spiral shape. And he summarizes, he sees this as evidence of the unitive energy of love on earth, which kind of appealed to my Pisces and Jupiter and Pisces self. I like that. That love on earth isn't an abstract, that love isn't an abstract quality, and the Sufis are actually right there on that. It's not an abstract quality, it's woven into the fabric of being. So all elements collude to create paradise, the sky, the heat of the sun, or the fires that we might burn on the night, the earth, the water. This beautiful beach is called 90 Mile Beach. It's way up in Northland. It's the wild side of the island. There's a west coast, you know, they're really narrow islands, so you can actually drive from the west to the east coast in New Zealand, you know, do it in a couple of hours and right up the top there. And 90 Mile Beach is the wild west side. And it goes for 90 miles. I think it's a tad more. And it goes all the way to Cape Reinga, which is the top of the island. Transpersonal air and fire, things will speed up. I think that goes without saying. Don't you love that, cheetah? The way they move their body when they're at top speed, it's quite extraordinary. The changing of the guards. So this answers that question about Saturn and Neptune meet at 0 degrees Aries exact on the 21st of February 2026, but June through August of 2025, they're in very close orb. So really soon they start their Aries thing, and then they both retrograde, Saturn in September, Neptune in October, and they get back to their previous places. Yeah, Saturn gets back to Pisces, Neptune gets back to Pisces. And of course, in 2025, they're basically conjoined in Pisces, in between conjoining in early Aries. Yeah, so Neptune settles on the 27th of January 2026, in Aries then for over 12 years. Saturn settles for its 2.5 years on the 14th of February 2026. Saturn makes its last sextile with Pluto, where it's getting in on what I'm calling a talent trine, the trine joined by 2 sextiles. It makes its very last sextile April 2026. So Saturn's in the picture for quite a while, because when it goes retrograde, it goes back further because it's faster. So it comes back to make its last sextile in April 2026. And that's going to be interesting to see, because the Saturn-Neptune connections don't have fabulous reputations. More climactic points in the rare changing of the guards. What strings will rule a Mars, Paul? Let's move you and see if we can, oh, I can't do it. Oh, we go on to this. What strings will rule a Mars, Paul? Well, beware big mistakes in the Saturn-Neptune cycle. One of the things, just a little bit of history, China has very linked. Mao Zedong was born on the Neptune Pluto conjunction in the late 1800s, but his big disastrous, what you'd have to call one of the biggest mistakes ever, was the thing he called the Great Leap Forward. That happened when Saturn and Neptune were in Libra. 55 million people, and that's probably not as many as did die, because he basically moved all of the workers to do other things and put all of the academics and people who'd never worked on farms on the farms. And they had great, it was a disaster. Some stupid idea of the proletariat, some crazy vision of the proletariat. And anyway, a lot of people died, and it coincided with drought, but people who'd been born to farming would have known better how to handle drought. It's funny now, but it must have been just absolutely terrible. Yeah, so only a year later, by 1954, that many people had died. It's just famine, widespread famine. And then the next thing that's been publicly declared by Chinese leaders as their worst mistake, Tiananmen Square, the massacre. That was when Saturn met Neptune, but it didn't just meet Neptune that time, it met Neptune and Uranus. But it's not a Chinese politician, by the way, it's rather a writer, a Chinese writer, probably one of the ones that got imprisoned or quickly left the country. Yeah, when Saturn met Neptune and Uranus in Capricorn, it was Tiananmen Square. So Saturn-Neptune isn't the best combination, because with Saturn, you've got that practical, do something about it, take control, go for a goal. And with Neptune, you've got the most otherworldly, loses sights of boundaries, couldn't give a fig about anything vaguely personal, because it's
The war come down, like in
89.
89.
Oh yeah, Saturn dissolves boundaries. I mean, Neptune dissolves boundaries. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Oh yes, absolutely. And but it's a time in our individual lives to really, great big fabulous idea could turn out to be great big mistakes, because Neptune will dream about it and maybe not do it, but Saturn's sort of pushing the doing. So, and I just hope it's
Thank you very much. I'm really sorry, I have to go.
lovely to see you again. Well, you could always go in and look at the rest. Not that there's much left, but yeah. Okay. Yes, so that's just something to be, yeah, and there's lots more things in Chinese history, but like there was a Saturn-Neptune opposition, I think involved in the actual forming of China's current chart. Saturn-Neptune pops up a lot, as well as which their chart for formation for the beginning of the current Chinese political system is 0 degrees Aquarius rising, Pluto. But the chemical industry is your classic Neptune problem. And the 50s were not good. The last time, that same, that's the closest we're going to get to comparing anything like the meeting in Aries, because they didn't meet in Aries the last time Neptune was in Aries. You have to go back another, it's over. I didn't end up doing it, but it wasn't the one that happened however many years ago. Yeah, something like that, or a bit more, yeah. So it might have been 160 or something, yeah. That wasn't there. So maybe the one before that probably means that's when Saturn would have, so it's a long, long time since they met in Aries. But when they met in Libra, which is the polar sign, it was certainly, that was certainly big in terms of that shift into the era in which the chemical industry started to gain such a hold on the way that things were done. So, but we're already getting signs that the backlash to spills and things that governments, well, certainly in New Zealand, there's just been a big test case, huge fine compared to what they've ever had before. So Pluto power cradle, that's a good one because I took out a lot of planets that you can just see, yeah. So that's that's an example of the cradle because I chose to do it when the sun was in Leo opposite Pluto. So in that case, we're getting the cradle because the sun's there. But even when there's nothing on that other point, we get the sextile between them. This part, that triangle is permanent. Pluto, the Uranus, and meeting, often with Saturn as well, in Aries. And when Saturn leaves, it pulls away, I think it was April of 2026, then it'll be the three that will go on right through into 27, 28. So it's quite interesting. So what does that, any thoughts on what sort of themes this is about? You know, the only other chart I could have put up was, that's a 2026 one, but I didn't have time to take planets out, but it was just an example of how long it continues. You can see that the talent trine is well and truly still there, but it's hiding away a bit more up here. So the more interesting one is this, because that's pulled all the other things out of the way. And yeah, anyone got any thoughts on it? You know, the Aries is obviously it's initiating, but then you've got the fact that it's, and obviously Mars is ruling this. So that's where you've got the potential, if Mars is ruling it and it's in Mars's warrior sign, then it's not just saying that you know, it's good new era stuff, it's good initiating stuff, but there's so many tinderboxes in the world, it's sort of, you worry a bit about that.
Well, the other thing is that the hours have been retrograded the same time, like for the last couple of years. So it's just stuck.
Yeah,
So it'd be interesting.
it's a shift. It's a shift from the stuckness. And earth and water can feel more stuck too. But because a lot of what's happening is sort of a bit hidden. Doesn't say it's not happening. So it will be more visible. There is a potential for perhaps more, you know, I was thinking that because there's a few things happening, there's this move towards trying to create more and more control in cities. Like they're already trying it out in Newcastle. There's some name for it. And it's to kind of try to make these areas where no one ever has to leave them. It's a hideous concept. It's like turning a city into a gated community. It's that sort of thing. I think it's hideous. And the pressures of cities as it grows and stuff, we might see another sort of, you know, rush out of the cities, another level of that. I know that it already happened to a point with COVID and certainly happened in the 60s. But it might also be that there is more vocal, not all verbal protest, but just voting with your feet kind of thing, or not voting with your feet as the case may be. No, because there's quite a lot of rebellion in there, isn't there, in that pattern?
Dissolving of boundaries.
Yeah, and because Saturn's there with Neptune, it's like getting on with it. Because as I said, Neptune can take a long time. It can feel like it's you know, sitting in nowhere land. You know, Neptune can be a long period of feeling disillusioned about something and long period of feeling depressed about something and feeling a bit lost, and so nothing much can happen. But throw in Saturn and both of them in Aries, it's interesting. Yeah.
You know, what else is the, I don't know why nuclear power, I don't know why it's
Yeah.
doing that. I was trying to.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was like fire in the sky, and it's like sky being the new territory to control.
Well, we're
It's like
already.
boundaries and zones.
Well, we're already in an era where
Yes.
it's being admitted that we
Yeah.
really are pretty stuffed when it comes to the way we've been handling energy, and that we
Yeah.
maybe could run out soon. And yeah, we've already got people going back on promises because they realise that the transition is going to be much slower than was predicted. But whether it's just more of that or something, you know, perhaps there's more political will for change in my level.
I think if you go back to like 250 years ago, it's a change in thinking. Like you have the French Revolution in America, it was around the time when Pluto would have been in Aquarius. So you may have a similar thing now where the way people think about things is changing.
Yeah. Yes, well, definitely with Gemini, definitely with Uranus in Gemini. That's a big factor. You know, Uranus in Taurus has been pretty big in terms of things Venusian. Now we're talking about Uranus in Gemini, things mercurial. And Mercury's already a trickster and already wears two hats at any one time, you know, in order to achieve whatever might have to be achieved that is unknown until you have to achieve it, kind of thing. It's not sort of like Saturn coming prepared with all the tools to do the task. It's rather a quality of mind that can shift and change. And so that would fit with, how did you say it? No, I've forgotten that. I've rattled.
Changing the mindset.
Yeah, mindset. Yeah. And
You have the age of reason was like 1700s, I think. So it's just a total different way of just really seeing the world.
yeah. And it could well be that that mindset, because the so-called age of reason was part of the time when mysterious arts like astrology were thrown out, were considered. And it could be we're looking at a shift of mindset that is embracing things that have been before discarded. That could be part of the Aries side of it, you know, the initiative. I don't know, it's interesting.
It's the AI.
Yeah.
Oh,
Decisions because we can't be trusted.
Oh, no.
well, that, yeah, I did the chart for when he signed the deal. And it was pretty hideous. I can't remember now, but I did the chart for when he signed the deal and sold his thing.
Yeah.
And it was, yeah.
Is there any more chart?
No,
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's it. Oh, that was just that other one that was 2026.
Stop sharing so that people at home might have questions for you.
It suddenly occurred to me that they might have stopped being able to hear me when I
No,
walked away.
they should be able
Because
to
we
hear.
haven't got a,
It's still there.
Yeah.
yeah, but we don't have a microphone. So it's just been dependent
They'll be
on.
able to hear.
Have you been able to hear me when I walked away from the?
Yes. Laptop.
I'm not getting any response from anyone. Can you actually hear me at all?
So there's one in message, two in the message, yeah.
Oh, can you, if you'd like to speak, please unmute, or have we got to unmute you? At least it's not my fault, it's Ben's fault.
I don't know what.
If it was up to me, we would barely be.
I think we're okay.
So can someone answer and say if you've actually been
Yeah,
hearing me
okay.
properly? Yes, yes. Oh, good. Any thoughts? Any thoughts on this shift of era?
Anyone there?
Yeah, there seems to be a couple of people left.
Their mics are muted.
But we haven't muted their mics. They've got their own mics muted, I think. You can unmute your mics if you would like to say anything. Please feel free. I'll put my glasses on and see if there's something I'm missing. Thanks, Christine. Informative and interesting. Yes, could hear, but it wasn't quite as distinct when you walked away. Yes, Sue, thanks for that. I realised as I walked away, I needed a multi-directional mic, and I have one too, back in my bag at home. Oh well. Well, thank you very much. I think we've. Goodbye all.
There's someone who here without. And stop the recording.